to look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, a major turning point in the Cold War. The course of the crisis had started with the Soviets recognizing that Central and South America were in the US sphere of interest. They had not actually retaliated when the US removed President Arbenz from Guatemala. He was in fact a communist. However, this act did influence Fidel Castro to launch a guerrilla war against the government of Batista in Cuba of December 1956, and this government was collapsed by January 1959. It's important to know that Castro was not actually a communist. He was just an anti-American and adopted Marxism-Leninism. This caused friction between Cuba and the US, as Castro began seizing US firms such as the United Fruit Company. In February of 1960, Anastas Mikoyan, who was the deputy chairman of the Soviet Council of Ministers, visited Havana, which reminded him of the heroic days of the Russian Revolution. This caused Khrushchev to threaten the USA in July if they attempted to invade Cuba, and he also suggested the ending of the Monroe Doctrine. This led to the Bay of Pigs incident, where the President of the US began authorizing the CIA to begin planning for Castro's removal, after an increase in the links between Cuba and the USSR were observed. In April of 1961, 1,400 Cuban exiles landed south of Havana on the Bay of Pigs. The plan was to begin an uprising, which was a very good plan, and it may actually have worked if Castro, in anticipation, had not arrested thousands of suspects. This caused the president to cancel both bombing raids and the landing of US Marines. Khrushchev understandably was delighted about this humiliation. However, he also saw as a warning that America and Castro were not going to mix. This led to the Soviets wanting to place missiles on Cuba. Unbeknown to the US, in August of 1962, Khrushchev had negotiated with Castro the Soviet-Cuban Accord, which allowed Khrushchev to place medium-range nuclear missiles on Cuba and defended by 40,000 Soviet troops, anti-aircraft batteries, short-range battlefield rockets, and MiG-21 fighter planes. This happened for two reasons. The first one is that it was hoping to closing the missile gap that had developed between the US and the USSR, particularly as the US had put missile bases in Turkey. The second reason was to defend the revolution in Cuba. On 4th of October, the Soviet ship India Urka carried at least 158 strategic nuclear weapons to Cuba. The US would discover this on the 14th of October 1962 when flying a U-2 spy plane over Cuba and discovering the missiles. 2 days later, the president was informed, but the information remained quiet to the public. The first plan of action was to launch a surprise attack, but ex-Com decided that was too risky and appealing to the United Nations would take too long. So, a plan for a potential invasion of Cuba was drafted and an ultimatum was sent to Moscow demanding the removal of the missiles. The US then initiated a quarantine zone, which was to stop and inspect any ships going to Cuba at about a radius of 500 miles. The president announced on 22nd of October that if any nuclear missiles were fired from Cuba, he would order a massive nuclear attack on the USSR. Naturally, the USSR began listening. On the 26th of October, when Khrushchev had decided to withdraw the missiles, the Americans demanded a guarantee that the US would not be attacked during this time. However, Khrushchev realized that he looked politically weak, so on the 27th of October, he demanded the removal of Jupiter missiles from Turkey. The president agreed to this, but said to not reveal the information to the public, and if the Soviets did, the missiles would remain. However, the missiles were removed from Cuba by the 20th of November. President Kennedy's popularity greatly increased as a result of this, and was promoted as the one who had called Khrushchev's bluff. Khrushchev, on the other hand, had his position severely weakened, due to this was now another failure during his ruling of the USSR. The USSR was also annoyed with the USA's superiority with nuclear weapons, and so decided that an ambitious program for the destruction of ICBMs should begin. The USSR also built up their navy to compete with that of the US. In 1963, both sides agreed to a hotline because they could not trust people delivering messages, and the UN diplomatic channels would take too long.